The author, Iwa Ong, in a book called Neoliberalism as Exception, makes this provocative claim that the North American university is being derempted from its obligation to prepare youngsters for citizenship in a democratic national space to a great marketplace for the optimization of the rational calculations of youngsters from the global south. And what I want to do today is to look at these the schools from which these youngsters come, and three of them in this case: Cloisters in Barbados, Straits in Singapore, and Ripon College in India, and what they're doing with the cultural heritages and inheritances, historical narratives, and so forth, archives, architectural traditions, inherited from the high point of British colonialism. These are schools, some of them going back as early as the 17th century, in the context of globalization and in the context of transforming educational markets in which new players are entering on the scene, such as the Mercedes-Benz International School in Pune in India, but the over 5,000 odd international baccalaureate schools spread across Europe, Asia, Africa, and the Caribbean. When I talk about elite schools, what am I talking about? I'm talking about schools that are understood to be the gold standard in their specific societies. So if you go to India and you say, what are the top 3 schools in India? You are likely to get the same answers just from a you ask. If you go to Singapore, the same thing. If you go to Barbados, the same thing. Secondly, these schools produce the politically and economically and militarily powerful. That is to say, the school in Singapore has produced pretty much all of its prime ministers. In Barbados, all but 2. In India, there is a strong presence of not only the political and economic, but a military elite. They're often fee-paying, but the school in Barbados is interesting. It's largely 98% government funded. And the Prime Minister of Barbados in the 1960s, Harold Barrow, who was a student of Harold Lasky, committed to social Fabianism, decided to abolish tuition at these schools and make these schools, admission to these schools solely based on performance in the 11+ exam, which was sent down from England, sat in Barbados, sent back to England. The results then given. And that, what is significant about that is that the school was an enclave, an exclusive enclave for the planter mercantile class, white planter mercantile. When the school was open up, when the tuition barrier to the lower middle classes was taken away. They literally stormed in. So by the time we were there, we are looking at a school that was formerly 100% white, now predominantly Afro-Barbadian. These schools are also globally connected. They have alumni associations and old scholars associations in New York, in London, in Toronto, etc. And these associations are active and often supporting. They are also likely to participate in international meets, in debating, in theater. They're members of something called Round Square. Actually, the school in India hosted Round Square, which is an organization that's committed to generating democratic values and understanding of processes and so forth among youth. And they're members of the Key Club, etc. They're committed to noblesse oblige. So the kids in the school in India were conducting IX in peasant communities in areas near the school. And they are sites of what I am calling class making, that a particular elite technical professional is emerging out of these transactions. They operate between the economic elites in the given countries and the disadvantaged, often as brokers, as a kind of brokering intellectual type, of the type that Pierre Bourdieu would call the dominated fraction of the dominant class. They're invested in symbolic capital, and that responsibility is a kind of communicative competence that the space of this transaction, so that, for example, in the 1940s, the 1950, 1960, the prime minister of Barbados came from the school that we're talking about, as well as the leader of the trade union Congress. Finally, these schools are based on the metropolitan, that is, they emulate Eton, etc., in their banners, their emblems, and their sort of cultural protocols, let's call it that. Strikingly, as a final point, these schools have their own histories and their own historians. And the historians tell epic stories of the past, built around great principles that England, and over 25 years, elaborated and generated achievement and success. So I want to just briefly go into, give you a feel for one of these sites, just briefly, before I start. So share sound is on, so to worry about that again. And now I think I can start things up. I take it that we're hearing it?
Yes.
Fantastic. And what is fascinating about that? Should I lower it? Is it too loud?
No.
Yeah, this is I vow to thee, my country, which is to me like an alternative national anthem in England. But it was written just around the First World War, the lyrics. And it was called at the time Herb's Day. It was written by Cecil Springer Rice, who was the British diplomat in the United States, and then he was relocated to Stockholm. And it was written at the time to encourage the British in their fight in the First World War, and particularly against the Germans. It is fascinating to me because we will soon also hear the music of Sir Edward Elgar, Pomp and Circumstance. That these constructs are inventions precisely in a time of the decline of empire.
Even now, like my uncles, my mother, they're asking me, well, when are you applying to Harvard? And oh, next year you're going to Yale or something. Those are my expectations, and I just live up to it, I guess. I have a cousin who went to Harvard at age 15. Yeah, and I have another cousin who went to UC Berkeley, and I think that's a good school.
So I'm going to stop there, and I'm probably going to share. I'm going to move this on just a little bit so that it's sort of a photo essay that takes you across takes you into the cultural context. But what is striking here with this youngster is the articulation of a self-authorizing commitment, in my view, of a neoliberal project. It's, as Foucault would say, life as a project, the aesthetics of working on the self. So Arjun Appadurai argues that in an essay of his, which he calls The Ghost of something to that effect, that modernization was a project that had as its unit the society. What we're seeing from the transactions of these youngsters is that the self is the unit for work and nation. I'm going to stop the sharing because I'm worried that it may be a little distracting, and I'll just continue. Entering consecrated space and hallowed history. I entered Old Cloisters for the first time in September 1944. So that's an alumnus of Old Cloisters in Barbados, on the bar of my father's bicycle. Head teacher of Canterbury Boys Elementary School at the time, my father was a great lover of history, a gene that I apparently inherited from him. As we passed through the Magnolia Street gates of Old Cloister School, he said to me, I say to you what this Drake said to his troops as he prepared to attack the Spanish town of Portobello. I brought you to this treasure house of the world. The rest is up to you. In the quote above, taken from an article written by one of the alumni of Old Cloisters High School in Barbados, Bledsoe Edith, former governor of the Barbados, one gets the sense of the shock and awe of these elite institutions in the island, generated at a time when members of the gentrified working class were beginning to enter them in the 1940s and 50s, when these institutions were still the preserve of the planter mercantile elite. The father in this story is an elementary school teacher, and he delivers his son to the door of cloisters, the so-called Eton of the West Indies, then predominantly a zone of exception for the white planter mercantile kids, and pedals away, not daring to enter. What were the objects and possessions of this school? The general law. What were elaborations in the visual domain and social aesthetics of the school, as McDougall describes with respect to the Doon School in India, that in fact echo into the present of similar schools constructed in the high colonial period of the British Empire around the globe. How are these elite schools now responding to globalization and the tremendous pressure of the new transnational education markets as new education actors enter the scene, such as the 5,000 plus international baccalaureate schools established in Europe, Asia, the Middle East, Africa, Latin America, and the Caribbean the last 2 decades. In the short time allotted to me, I want to give you a little bit of the flavor of what James Gifford calls tangled historicities, registered in the visual and iconographic domains of a number of schools in a 9-country international study on elite schools in globalizing circumstance I've been doing with colleagues from India, Singapore, South Africa, and Australia, and my graduate students who hail from Kenya, India, Turkey, China, Chile, and the United States. It is by giving attention to what might be understood as the dead, inert life and objects of such schools that we might in fact see more deeply into the contradictions of the living present. In this regard, I look closely at what postcolonial elite schools in our international study are doing with their historical archives, preserved cultural objects, architecture, emblems, models, and their school curricula, increasingly now this entire ornamental furniture online as they marshal these cultural resources at the crossroads of profound change precipitated by globalization and attendant neoliberal imperatives. This change is articulated across the whole gamut of global forces, connections, and aspirations, as Michael Bowe maintains, and it is in relation to and through these dynamics that postcolonial elite schools must now position and reposition themselves, acting and intervening in and responding to new globalizing circumstances that often cut at right angles to the historical narratives and the very social organization of these educational institutions. These institutions I'm maintaining are engaged in branding, in rebranding, and the students are engaged in self-branding as they prepare their portfolios in their ambitions for post-secondary futures. Globalizing developments have precipitated efforts on the part of these schools to mobilize their rich heritages and past as a material and not simply as a matter of indelible and inviolate tradition. History, then, I maintain in this context, cannot be reduced to the realm of epiphenomena. of codified narratives, consolidated paths, and securely linear school chronologies. Instead, drawing on Walter Benjamin, I look at the way in which colonial school histories are active in the present, and the way in which schools in India, Barbados, and Singapore are adroitly and selectively managing their school identities in the light of globalization. The results of these interventions are not guaranteed. They often run up against the revolution of rising expectations of school young. I'm talking about the way in which students are figuring out how to do well in exams, but as teachers told me, we're not really intellectually engaged in content, that the sui generis investment in knowledge had been something that they felt like they had lost. And you sort of saw in these sites ships passing each other in the night. The kids with their roiling ambition, and the teachers with a sense of intensification of labor coming with digitalization, where the platform of labor extends from the classroom to the home, being in some ways startled by the transforming pace of development. This presentation is organized in the following way. I begin with 3 vignettes. I can't go into all 3 now, so I'll just do one. One centered at Old Cloisters in Barbados, the other centered at Straits, and the last one at Ripon, that illustrate this tremendous investment and ascesis of cultural work on tradition and the blessed colonial ironies latent in such transactions. Second, I try to say a little bit about what I think this means. Third, I end with a photo essay that shows the tangled nature of the past in the present, the tangled nature of ancient and modern discursive universes of these schools, articulated in the of the global imaginations and self-modernizing fervor of the Barbadian youngster, alloyed with the recruiting zeal of North American universities seeking to capture academic talent in the island. So I'm talking about a reciprocal process. Ambitions of youngsters to move away from what was the old model, which was Oxford and Cambridge, to Ivy Leagues and institutions, sort of science technology institutions in the United States, but a recruiting effort that is tremendously ramped up, not only for Barbados, but for Latin America and Asia. So when I was in Singapore, Princeton was there, Harvard was there, the University of Chicago was there, Stanford was there, and so was Oxford, all making the case for why the brilliant student from Strait should head to their institutions rather than the other one. And this I see as the convention setting in which this happens, I see as a site of a new imperialism. The students delightfully welcome. That is, through this, they saw their futures. There was not the noise of an imposition that they were responding to. And each of these institutions came with their paraphernalia, they had their desks, and behind them was the national flag, the maple leaf, the Union Jack, Stars and Stripes, the various European. And you will see this in the PowerPoint that I want to show. And so even the State Department was represented at this International College Fair, which is a new technology and the arrival of a new institutional transactional space. When I did high school in Barbados, it did not exist. It just emerged within the last 15 years or so, along with something called the American University of Barbados, by the way, which was established in the last 5 years. So VIGNET 1. Our Barbados team of researchers at Old Cloisters were by some of the sixth form students to view an extraordinary transaction of the current students with the past, not only of their school, but of the island. We were led into the hallowed space of the assembly hall of Old Cloisters, a space, as the school historian Tom Cross notes, where the school's ornamental and cultivated past, its plaques listing the names of prestigious Barbados scholarship holders and the portraits of its old white British schoolmasters going back to 1733. Beams down from on high onto a school body comprised largely of Afro-Barbadian youngsters. So above them are these, the Barbados Scholarship is the device that is going to make it possible for the roiling ambition to be materialized. There are a limited amount of these that can be given every year. So it intensifies the pressure, it intensifies the competition. But these plaques are there, and if you ask, you talk to a kid, the kid will point plaques and say, I want to be up there. At the same time, as you sort of pan the entire space, you see the principles, the portraits of the principles in this setting. These are the sort of blessed post-colonial ironies that I'm talking about, that you have layer upon. There's this wonderful historian of Japanese modern history. His name is Harry Haratunian of the University of Columbia, who talks about the haunting of history. That in any institutional site are layers of memories, etc., often undiscussed, that take you back to transactions, some of them of power and violence. And often in these settings, that this amnesia about the past, that is schools built on plantations, etc. The school in South Africa, they were trying to set up a museum, and when they dug into the soil, they discovered shackles from the past, shackles of slaves that were not African, but Indonesian. So on and on, you had this sort of dynamic. Picture this layered scene of images latent with allusions to the colonial past, trophies of the present, and the iconography and high watermarks of British public school, and in the post-colonial setting. But look again, this hall normally reserved for formal gatherings, modern assembly, morning assembly, the hosting of speech there, when all the dignitaries would be invited to the school. School officials, alumni, and their parents congregate to celebrate the students' achievements and the continued success of the school, was now hosting something else. As a sign of the times, it is here that contemporary students to stage a passerella, a fashion show, a modeling event, engaging with their past and the ethnic history of the school in a form of self-orientalization. as they signal their interest in exotic futures, modeling over the traditional career paths of lawyering or doctoring. It was a striking scene of hybridity, as the models dressed in costumes of many different ethnic groups, Chinese, Yoruba, Scottish, Native American, strutted across the day as if they were on a catwalk. The student audience, made up of their peers, responded with a mixture of delight and Orientalist curiosity, seeing their school friends as models of something alluring from the circulation of images in the virtual domain. Let me see if, I'll do this, just this brief second vignette. In the round one fieldwork at Straits, all researchers were given a school tour that began in the old block where year 1 4 classrooms reside. It is also in the old block where some of the most rich and intense displays of colonial history of the school are embedded. We were brought to the administration office. On our way to a conference room, we walked past a passageway where old photos of past principals were hung up on the walls. Photos of the principals were arranged in a linear and chronological manner, from the colonial to the post-colonial. The post-colonial moment was apparent because it was when local Chinese principals were appointed. During the colonial period, all the principals were white. Some form of these vignettes would be reproduced across virtually all our research sites. What does this aggregation of symbolism mean? What is its historical significance in present circumstances in which globalization, as I have noted, is altering the social context and relationships of the elite schools in our study, both internally and externally? How ultimately are research schools putting these extraordinary historical archives and cultural patrimony to work? I call attention to the elite schools' manipulation and modulation of history to meet present challenges and the pressure of globalizing change. I especially call attention to the choreographed practices of making conducted by these schools as they re-articulate and reinvent their symbolic circumstances in a project of hegemonic stabilization. These vignettes help underscore and build on the theoretical understanding of the work of history and tradition in these contexts. Takes on sharpened significance given the profound enmeshment of our research schools in the colonial order. On this topic, the writing of David Cannondine is particularly helpful. In his theory of ornamentalism, Cannondine maintains that hegemonic orders are choreographed and that the maintenance of class and racial relations in such orders are accompanied by tremendous investment in symbolic capital and its organization and disposition. Cannondine points specifically to the hegemonic work of anthems, honors, plaques, titles, regalia, costumes, uniforms, emblems, in creating a graded but unifying system of references that integrated all subjects in the periphery and the core alike in the British Empire. As Canada notes, the British honor system tied together the dominions of settlement, the Indian Empire, and the tropical colonies in one integrated, ordered, transracial hierarchy that no other empire could rival. In this graded order, it could be argued not only that all knew their place, but many competed for elevation of status and value. The concept of ornamentalism echoes and builds on ideas in the work of post-colonial scholars like Edward Said, Stuart Hall, and Eric Williams. And Eric Williams and others argue that the stratified ordering of culture also assisted in the transfer of capitalistic and competitive energies deep into the cultural sphere. So drawing on Kant and these other authors, I understand these developments as a process of what I'm calling burnished ornamentalism. I understand such ornamentalism as a set of practices that are profoundly linked to the constant recruiting of class subjects and the project of class making in the uncertain, contemporary, competitive environment. Globalization continues to place enormous pressure on these old institutions. Now, this process of ornamentalism, I'm saying, is defined or articulated by three key practices. First, there's the practice of what I'm calling selective emphasis or critical choice work. And I'm drawing here on the work of Raymond Williams and talking about tradition. This is also the idea in Canondine of the construction of affinities, or what Edward Said calls the process of binding a culture affiliatively. Choice work involves processes of strategic refinement in which our research schools elect to retain aspects of the metropolitan model by rejecting or abandoning other features of the same symbolic system. So for example, at Old Cloisters, they've decided to do away with the Oxford and Cambridge exams for the Caribbean exam council's exams, but they still hold on to the trove of inherited symbols and flag, bunting, and special cultural practices. In Singapore, the school that we're looking at has asked the Cambridge Examination Board to create a special exam in English that is more difficult than the one that is used for regular matriculation in England. And in fact, there is this sort of understanding in Singapore that if you want your kid to get into these elite schools, universities, that you send your kid to England, where there are chances, there are competitive chances, than if they remain in Singapore, where the competition is incredibly fierce. So that's one example of ornamentalism. The other that I want to talk about is what I see as sort of Janus work, where schools are looking back and looking future at the same time. So if you are at Straits again, you're in a school, unlike the one at Ripon, which is a sort of Indo-Saracenic building, a mixture of Gothic and Saracenic style, or in Barbados, where it is Georgian. The buildings, in the case of Straits, are of the international style. But there, in that sort of elevation of modernism, high modernism, they keep the statues of their past principles, and particularly their founder. Around that image are fresh cut flowers that are supplied on a daily basis. And the third aspect of ornamentalism, because I really want to bring things to a close so I can get your thoughts, is the strategy of going online. These schools have lifted their entire cultural furniture online in official websites with particular narrations of what their schools are about, often emphasizing cosmopolitan values, displacing eliteness as the idea of snobbery, but linked to achievement, high quality values, and so forth. So if you type in any name of these schools and you go on YouTube, you have a treasure trove for doing what I would call digital ethnography. And as we were in the sites, you felt like the digital world was overlapping with the face-to-face. And often that you could get more powerful information from the digital space than of interviewing principals, etc., who often were engaged in what I call disavowal. That is, if you ask the principal at Old Cloisters in Barbados, do you keep statistics on race or class? They will immediately tell you no. And they say, basically, the kids at our school are smart. That's all we're interested in. We do not keep such figures. If you ask what percentage of the school is underachieving, how many underachievers, again, there's no answer. So it then makes documents, strategic plans, etc., very revealing as to how schools are operating. And participant observation, just the quadrangle and seeing the cars come in, or who comes in on a bicycle. And the parents coming in with the BMWs and the SUVs are obviously of one type, and those walking in, the kids or whatever, or the kids coming in with bicycles, often of a different kind of fraction, class fraction. The use of ornamentalism is not a singular or homogeneous process, however. There are contradictions and discontinuities despite the best efforts of coordination by these schools. They live in, I think, the space of disavowal. That is, all of these crests, all of these school songs have a history. But if you ask the principal, if you ask a teacher, if you ask a student, what do these two lions with rage paws on your school emblem means? They have no real meaningful response. School song come from. I was in the ironic situation in Singapore when the principal, for some reason, began to sing her school song, and I was able to finish it. And we looked at each other like two post-colonial subjects, suddenly discovering something. That the thing that we thought was our own and our own exclusively was actually making a circuit from England to Singapore, where then the principal in Singapore then went to Barbados, took the song there. But this is what Arjun Appadurai calls the circulation of forms and forms of circulation. You saw this again and again, that these items existed at a level of mythology, as Roland Barthes calls it. Myth, Barthes argues, is a type of speech in which history is drained out. All that mattered to these kids was that this was their own. This tie that they wore distinguished them from others. Their school song, lies are in the making here, hearts are in the making here, mighty undertaking, up and on, distinguishes them from the other school. And therefore, you have a sense of eternality of things that is not sort of submitted to scrutiny. All considered then, elite schools in the globalizing context are attempting to marshal their histories at the crossroads of profound change. The straits, Ripon, and cloisters are therefore dealing with matters that involve scaling or rescaling of the past to consolidate these schools' relationships to local and national projects, as well as global imperatives in the present. Just as importantly, and perhaps more insistently, these schools must now respond and are responding to neoliberal economic that are powerfully articulated, not simply out there in the global arena, but in the very personalized and customized desires of their students, seeking careerist futures with furious energy and investment. Today, says one of the students at Ripon College, we say we are Indian citizens. Tomorrow, we will say we're of the world. For these youngsters, the world is their oyster, and they seek to carve out futures in a broad range of arenas that can make the past seem irrelevant or relevant in new ways. But as I have noted, the past persists. It breaks into the present and the imagination of the future. Like the Angelus Novus, Paul of the New Angel, the Angel of History, read by Walter Benjamin in his theses on philosophy of history as a portent of the future buffeted by the past, contemporary elite schools must carry the burdens and glories of the past selectively and strategically, using and deploying tradition even as they orient to the future. For the purposes then of concluding this presentation, I point to the way Benjamin and Clay's Angelus Novus flourishes in the age of globalization, awakening historical ruins and haunting the present. All of this blooming in the age of what David Harvey calls the new imperialism. Stuart Hall, before he died in 2014, in a talk that he gave that is now circulating on a website called Dark Matter, says that the post-colonial moment is to be marked by the moment when the decolonization movement capitulated to capitalism. The students at Ripon Straits and Old Cloisters then, as they turn their gaze towards the futures and beyond their national perimeters, reciprocal developments of great import are taking place, and those developments are of the recruiting energies coming out of the United States, Canada, and Europe. And all of these are in this video, this PowerPoint that is centered in the international colosphere, which I argue is a technology that arises out of the competitive moment in which globalizing pressures are forcing schools to think about doing something else. It's like the Old Cloister School in the past, in the 30s and before, was known for its classics, its commitment to the study of Latin and Greek. And a group of the youngsters of that period were known as the Rolls Royces for the speed at which they could translate Virgil and Livy into English. When we got there, that whole section of the school had disappeared. Greek and Latin were no longer part of the curriculum. The curriculum was dominated by science and technology. And students were not interested really in the humanities. There was one sort of section that would be roughly arts and languages. But the dominant part of a curriculum that had sort of 5 streams, 4 of those were science and technology, and this would be to be repeated across the other schools as well. And so I want to end with just showing you a little of this PowerPoint, which I am calling Discovery and Conquest, and then I will entertain some questions. So I go to share screen again, share. It is less important this time for sound. And there we go. Sir Edward Elder, Pomp and Circumstance. And again, a piece of music, I think written around 1903, maybe the time of our day during the period of the rule of Queen Victoria, etc. But this is sort of at the period when traditions are being invented, I would argue, at the time of the emerging decline of the British Empire. And so this will run, the sound is gone. I'd like to stop there. I suspect it went on a little longer than I had contracted for. So thank you very much for your patience.
Thank you so much. That was very interesting, Cameron. So